July in the Mojave was the kind of heat that stripped a person down to the bone. The kind where the wind felt like it carried teeth, biting skin with every shift. At midday, nothing moved except shadows, and even they dragged themselves slow across the hard dirt. On the far edge of Jack Mercer's ranch, where the fence sagged like an old man's spine, a figure stood barefoot in the burning sand. Her dress was soaked to the knees, heavy from whatever she had walked through to get there. A burlap sack covered her head, tied so tight it dug into her skin, no slits for sight or breath. Rope held her wrists behind her back, the fibers cutting deep enough to shame barbed wire. She stood perfectly still, not flinching against the sun, not shifting her weight, not making a sound. Just waiting, like someone who had already accepted that no one was coming. Jack saw her while riding the fence line, Cinder's hooves kicking up dust with every step. He slowed when he noticed the shape by the fence post he'd promised himself he'd fix years ago. Something about the stillness struck him wrong enough to stir memories he hadn't touched in years, burying his brother, burning the remains of his home after the fire, losing the woman who once called him her compass. Those kinds of losses carved a man out from the inside. They made him able to recognize a different kind of hollow in others. He dismounted without a word, boots sinking into the hot sand. When he reached her, she didn't turn, didn't ask who he was. Her voice came thin and dry from behind the sack, cracked down the middle. "Please take them off." Jack didn't answer. He just lifted his calloused hands to the knot at the back of her head. Whoever tied it did so with hate, tight, deliberate, meant to stay shut. It took him nearly 3 full minutes to loosen it. When the sack finally peeled away, she didn't gasp or shake or burst with relief. She simply blinked hard against the sun, as if she hadn't expected to see daylight again. Her face was a map of bruises, old and new. A welt stretched from cheek to jaw. Her lower lip had split days ago and clotted in a crooked line. Her hair was tangled, dirty, matted with dried blood at the temples. But her eyes carried something fierce beneath the fear, like embers that refused to die even after the fire had gone cold. Jack said nothing. He lifted her gently onto the saddle and walked beside the horse the long way back to the cabin. She never asked where he was taking her. She never even looked back. Inside the cabin, she sat wrapped in one of his old blankets, staring at the floorboards. Jack poured water into a tin cup and placed it in her hands. She drank slow, careful, as if she was afraid it might disappear if she blinked. He boiled a potato and cut it in half, giving her the bigger piece. She didn't ask why. She ate in silence, shoulders curled inward like she was waiting for someone to strike her. For almost 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the crackle of the fire. She spoke suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. "They said if a man looked at me too long, he'd be cursed." Jack didn't lift his eyes from the fire. "Sounds like cowards talking," he said plainly. She gave him a crooked, cautious, almost smile. First one he suspected she had made in months. The next morning, he stepped outside expecting to find her gone. Instead, she was by the clothesline, hanging his shirts with slow, stiff movements. His boots, 2 sizes too big, clomped awkwardly in the dirt with every step she took. She didn't ask to stay, but she didn't act like she was leaving either. In a town like Ridgerist, word travels faster than a rattler in dry brush. By midday, the saloon was drowning in stories. Some men said Jack found a Comanche girl. Others swore she was a witch. One drunk insisted she was a ghost Jack dug up and fell in love with. Jack didn't waste breath on any of them. He had fences that needed fixing and a girl with rope burns who flinched every time he coughed too loud. That evening, 2 riders showed up on the South Road. They didn't wave, didn't smile, just sat stiff on their horses staring at Jack's house like it owed them something. Jack stepped onto the porch, one hand on the post, one eye on the men. Inside, the girl's shadow stiffened, though she tried not to move. The taller rider tipped his hat. "Looking for a girl," he said. "Red hair, wore a sack." "Haven't seen her," Jack answered without so much as a blink. The second man chuckled, low and dirty. "She limps a little. Pretty if you get past the quiet." From inside the house came the sound of shallow breathing. Jack stepped off the porch, slow and steady. "She ain't here," he said. "Best you keep ridden." The taller rider leaned back in his saddle. "She ain't yours to keep." Jack's voice dropped low, cold. "She ain't anyone." The men left, but Jack knew better than to think it was over. On the third night they returned for this time. No lanterns, no greetings, just the steady thump of hooves moving through the dark like a hammer on a coffin lid. Jack was already standing on the porch, shotgun hanging loosely in his hands. The man who stepped forward was the same one from before, but now Jack could see him clearly. Grant Teller. The kind of man whose name drifted across border towns like a bad smell, girls gone missing, cards marked, debts that ended in blood. "She belongs to the man who paid," Grant said. "She ain't property," Jack replied. The front door opened behind Jack. The girl stepped out barefoot, wrapped in one of his quilts, eyes steady despite the tremble in her hands. "You afraid of me, Grant?" she asked. Grant stiffened, mask cracking. His men exchanged confused glances. "You beat me," she continued. "Sold me, left me in the dirt and called me a curse. But look who's shacking now." Jack lifted the shotgun, not aiming, just raising the stakes. "You ride out," he said. "And if I see you on this land again, you won't ride out at all." Grant didn't argue. He turned his horse and vanished into the dark. The others followed. When they were gone, she sat next to Jack on the porch steps. She didn't cry. She simply breathed, long and steady, like someone relearning the art of staying alive. Jack sat beside her in silence. He didn't need to speak. Some things didn't require words. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The ranch changed. She began walking the fence lines at dawn in Jack's boots, her shoulders straighter each morning. She learned how to mend wire, saddle a horse, boil coffee, and shoot steady enough to hit a tin can from 30 yards. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she smiled at nothing in particular, small, quiet smiles that had been locked away for too long. Ridgerist slowly stopped whispering. Some folks waved again. Others dropped off peaches or old blankets. A few apologized indirectly by saying things like, "Need any supplies, Jack?" and leaving the answer hanging in the air. Then one spring morning, a wagon rolled up the trail. Inside sat a woman with a faded dress and tired eyes, a small child asleep across her lap. She stepped down and stared at the girl for a long, quiet moment before whispering, "I was with you back in Texas, before they split us." The girl didn't cry. She just lifted the sleeping child, held the woman's shaking hands, and walked them into the house. That night, Jack opened the barn and pointed to the loft. "Plenty of room," he said. And that was that. The ranch became something else entirely, a place where the discarded found refuge. The woman stitched quilts out of canvas and old shirts. The child helped sort nails by size and sang when she thought no one heard. The girl planted herbs near the cotton tree and tended to them like prayer. Jack built a new room onto the house, hands steadier than they had been in years. One afternoon, the girl found the burlap sack in a drawer. She walked it out to the pasture, tied it to the fence, and let the wind take it. She didn't chase after it, didn't look back. Months later, Grant Teller returned alone. He stumbled into the clearing broken, starved, hunted by men much worse than himself. He begged for a horse, for food, for water. Jack was ready to turn him away, but the girl stepped forward and stopped him. "You left me in the dirt," she said, "but I won't leave you there." They fed him, patched his wounds, gave him water and a mule barely strong enough to walk. He left without looking back, and no one in Ridgerist saw him again. By the next winter, the ranch had become something healed, something steady, something solid. The girl walked the land like she belonged to it, and it belonged to her. Jack watched her from the porch one evening as the sun sank behind the mesas, turning the desert purple. "You stayin'?" he asked finally. She didn't smile, not fully, but her breath came slow and sure. "I'm tired of running." Jack nodded, then handed her a hammer. She took it, and side by side, they kept building. Out in the Mojave, where the world had tried to break her, she found a place that asked nothing in return except the simple truth of staying alive. And after everything she'd survived, that was enough. Sometimes the strongest people weren't the loudest. They were the ones who refused to disappear.